Welcome, Peter. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Matt. Well, thanks for asking me along today. I'm Peter Duffell. I've been a professional coach since 2014. Previous to that, I was in information technology for nearly 30 years and got into coaching firstly because I had a coach myself about 18 years ago and realised that I was naturally worked in that way, but also because I like working with people more than I did working with machines. So I did a master's degree at Oxford Brookes University, finished that in 2013 and started working as a coach full-time in 2014. So I started work with specialty trainees in 2016, where I was engaged to do some work in the East Midlands. And since then we've worked, when I say we, that's me and my company and my associate coaches, across the West Midlands, and we're also working in the Northwest region as well. So we've worked with a wide range of trainees in lots of specialties. We tend to get a lot of people in GP in the East Midlands, for example, anaesthesia in the West Midlands, surgery in the Northwest, but everything in between. So we work with radiology, immunology, everything you can pretty practically think of, really. We work with trainees at all levels. So, you know, we might be working with a foundation year one doctor 1 minute, ST8 plastic surgery the next. Most of what we're doing is helping people with exams, particularly where people have failed an exam a couple of times. So we'll work with on a variety of things, you know, strategies, time management, confidence. In terms of the types of exams, well, obviously the member of the Royal College, the fellow of the Royal College, PACES, the GP examinations, different types of exams, obviously, MCQ, single best answer, OSCEs, Vivas. So had a very wide range of experience supporting trainees, basically.
How did you get interested in working with doctors?
Interesting question. When I first started working with doctors, you know, the challenge was, what do you know about medicine? And actually, yeah, not a lot, but at the same time, I know a lot about people, I think. And over time, it's kind of gradually grown. And actually, a lot of the challenges that we see can be related to my leadership experience anyway. You know, somebody might have an MSF comment about, you know, the team leadership skills. So they'll be referred to us for support with those. You know, sometimes we might be working with a trainee right at the end of their training, thinking, wow, in 3 months' time, I'm going to be a consultant running a team. I've had very little leadership training help. So that kind of helped to get me started. But obviously, you know, I'm an older chap and I've been around the block a little bit. So, you know, know a fair amount about medicine. Thankfully, touch wood, not as a consumer of the services. I've been very lucky in that respect. But at the same time, you know, people I've worked with, you know, family, they have various issues. You know, people get cancer, you know, have babies, all that sort of thing. So I've got an awareness of medicine, and actually gradually over time, particularly as I've worked with GPs, for example, you know, you do kind of get a very good understanding of how things work. And coupled with that too, we've got a very good understanding of the program. So, you know, what's an education supervisor do? What does a TPD do? What's an ARCP? All those kinds of things. But the advantage for me as an external coach is the quality of the conversations we can have. So, you know, I'm not in the program, and, you know, the usual caveats around confidentiality apply. But at the same time, people can have a conversation with me that they can't have, or my team that they can't have with their trainers or the people that they work with. So it enables us to get, you know, quite a good deep depth of conversation and get into things that are really, you know, helpful to them.
And when it comes to exams, what kind of issues do people bring?
All sorts of things, really. I mean, the first thing that I noticed, I mean, obviously, you know, it depends where you are in your training as the sorts of issues that might come about. So, you know, early years, you're doing your member of Royal College exams. versus later on where you might be doing fellowship exams. Obviously, that time gap means that in the later exams, you're more senior, you're probably a registrar, senior registrar, you've got a lot of responsibility, you might have a family, so work's busy, you've got a busy family life, you want to try and spend a bit of time for yourself too, and in amongst all of that, you've got to find the time to do the revision as well. So both for the early years and the later years, just finding the time to do it is one of the bigger challenges.
Mm-hmm. And how can you help people with their time management?
Well, first of all, we'd work out what are people actually doing. How are you spending your time? And then you can start looking at, are you actually spending time on the right things? Because there's a lot of things that you can do that aren't particularly helpful and just consume hours. But we also look at the well-being lifestyle as well. So people will say to me, well, I want to revise. I'm revising for this exam. I want to spend 2 hours a night revising, and from the beginning that's probably an unrealistic goal, because unless they live on their own and don't have any dependencies or any other responsibilities, if you've had a busy long day and you go home, by the time you've had something to eat and seen the kids and done everything else, are you realistically going to have a couple of hours of good quality revision at the end of that? Most likely not. So of course the problem then is you do that for a few days, and you do get some time to revise, and then you think, actually I'm minus 6 hours on my plan for the week. I haven't done any revision yet. I've got to catch up those 6 and do what I'm doing today. So pretty quickly people get to the point where they think this isn't realistic, this isn't working. I turn it around the other way. I'm a big believer in small goals. So say to yourself, look, I'm going to do a realistic amount of study a week is 8 hours, for example. So I can fit that in on any of my off days or evenings. If I sit down and plan that at the beginning of the week, I've got some sense of where I can do it, but I also have some sense of where my other free time is as well, because life happens. The washing machine floods the kitchen. So I was supposed to be studying, but now I've got to deal with that. Or, the kids are ill, you're ill. Or even, on the plus side of the ledger, a friend phones you up and says, oh, Pete, I haven't seen you forever. Do you fancy coming out for a cheeky beer and a catch up? What are you going to do? Say no? Because that brings different challenges. So you have to have some room in there for spontaneity as well. So, my starting point is always, realistically, how much time are you going to spend working on your exams in the week? But more importantly as well, it's about matching what you revise to your energy level. So for example, if I'm a morning person and I'm not working Thursday, well, Thursday morning is a great time for me to be doing bookwork, because that's when I'm, I've had a night's sleep, I can focus, I do my best work in the morning. So I would say ring fence that time for your bookwork. Later in the day, where you've used up some of your cognitive resources, do some other things, do question banks, look at videos on YouTube, do your revision notes, but also have breaks. Don't sit there for 8 hours, sit for 2 hours, then go and do something else for an hour or two, then come back. So little and often is one of the better strategies for revision. And one of the key things to doing that is starting early. Mm-hmm. I know people will say, oh, I crammed it all in the last 3 weeks. Yeah, I think you have to be a little bit skeptical. Some people will have done that, but most of us will need to start out, 3, 4 months, 5 months in advance, planning the time and revising that way.
Yeah, I suspect that the person that says I just revised for 3 weeks, I'm always very skeptical who says that. I mean, if they revise for 3 weeks and failed, yes, that makes perfect sense. But people that say they passed with 3 weeks revision, you always think, that something doesn't ring true.
Yeah, that's always a big issue. You can never really understand what's going on in somebody's head. So they might say that you could never validate it. And actually, all of the research evidence tends to point towards little and often is a better strategy than cramming, because they say if you cram for 3 weeks, you might pass the exam, but 3 weeks later you'll have forgotten it all. and the point is, with a lot of these exams, you know, you have a part A and a part B, or like with the GP exams, you have the AKT, the Advanced Knowledge Test, followed with the clinical skills assessment. So the knowledge that you get for the AKT underpins what you do in the clinical skills assessment. So if you don't spend the time to get the knowledge in your head, then actually, I'm not saying you're bound to fail, but it will make passing at the next stage a little bit trickier.
And I'm interested in this idea of people comparing themselves to each other. So, you know, you go to practice courses and somebody else, they know so much more than me and I don't know anything. Or, you know, they just revised for 3 weeks. Why do I have to revise for 6 months? What are your tips for dealing with that, comparing to each other all the time?
I always say you're never actually genuinely comparing apples with apples. So even, you know, so take somebody in your specialty, ear, nose and throat, you know, they might be ST3, but they'll have done their foundation 1 and 2, and they might have done palliative, you know, renal, whatever. Their colleagues will have done something else entirely different. So even your route to get to ST3 ENT won't be the same. And you layer on top of that, you know, some people are interested in, you know, different things, so they might read a lot more on a given topic. So, you know, you notice this a lot when people talk about ward rounds, you know, so, you know, Matt knows so much more than me about that, and I'm feeling, you know, wanting. But actually, do you know what, if it was on my kind of strong subjects, then maybe they'd be looking at me thinking, wow, Peter knows a lot, doesn't he? and I'm feeling wanting. So, you know, it's kind of swings and roundabouts. So I often get people to reflect on what is it that they're actually interested in. What do they bring to the table? Because you're always going to get some variety. And actually, is it a fair comparison if, you know, you've got you know, a family life and whatever, versus somebody that all they do is eat, sleep and drink medicine? You know, they're the ones that are sat in the canteen at lunchtime reading research papers. You know, there's medicine's a broad church. There's room for both. So I often work on that. You know, is the comparison actually realistic, and is it that helpful?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of preparing for an exam then, so little and often, start early, don't compare yourself to others. What other tips would you have for somebody who knows that, you know, in a year's time, I've got to do a big exam. What else can I do?
Well, the first thing I always encourage people to do is have a plan. I don't encourage people to overplan, because life events happen and you don't want to spend weeks coming up with the perfect plan only to throw it in the bin because something's happened and it's all out the window. But I would say look at the curriculum and break it down. You know, what bits am I going to study when? Because you know, you have to get through the broadness of the curriculum. You know that there's going to be a depth to it too, but you haven't got the time. Even if you had nothing else to do and years to revise, you would never quite cover the entire curriculum to the depth that you could possibly be asked to cover it. So I'll give you a good example as well. So take surgery, the first surgery college exams. They tell you in advance that 40% of the questions will be on anatomy, which makes a lot of sense. The problem is people spend 60% of their revision time on anatomy because it's a big chunk of the marks. What they've then done is, I've only got 40% of the time left to cover 60% of the questions. So when you kind of map it out that way, you kind of think, okay, well, I've got to time box it, right? If I've got 10 months, then I'll spend 4 months on anatomy. And when I've done my 4 months, I have to stop, because otherwise I'm into fortune telling now. I'm gambling that there'll be more questions on anatomy or some other subject area on this paper than normal, and you won't know that. You won't know what's on the paper until you sat it. So there's a couple of things I was encourage people to do. Time box things. Don't start robbing other subjects because I haven't quite got through the work that I needed to on this particular topic area. I also encourage them to mix things up a bit. So, you know, if I was to do my 4 months on anatomy now, and then, you know, in a year's time I'm doing my exam, well, I'll have forgotten it. So this is where the little and often comes in. You got to kind of keep revisiting topics to keep the knowledge as fresh as possible. The question banks are really helpful for that. So often people will, you know, I've done all, you know, I've revised respiratory, great, so I'll do all the respiratory questions, fine. But then I'd suggest once a month, you know, do 100 random questions, because there'll be a few respiratory questions in there, you know, right the way up to the exam, just to kind of keep the respiratory stuff ticking over. An alternative way of doing it, you know, sometimes, you know, not everybody likes everything. So that, for argument's sake, say I really did dislike respiratory, and I find it a really tough subject to revise. You know, the prospect of sitting down for a month revising respiratory is not going to be that great a prospect. And you know, you're likely to actually, I'm going to need extra time at the end, because it will be so slow going. I won't cover what I need to cover. So my advice is always, you know, do a week on respiratory and then have a few weeks off, then do another week, or even a day a week on respiratory, because what that means is I only have to put up with it for today, and then the rest of the week there are subjects I actually like more. Just motivationally, it kind of helps to get through things a little bit more easily.
So I like that. So we got little and often, we got mixing subjects up, but also being time bounded. You know, when your allocated time for this area is done, then you need to move on. I can imagine that that's going to be quite tough for the people that are perfectionists, that think, oh, I must know everything about respiratory or whatever it is, and yet time is, you need to move on. So how can people think to help them recognize that actually, you know, I'm never going to know everything I need to know, time to move on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges that you have with being a doctor is that you're in a very bright population. So there will be people that know an awful lot about everything, but that's a given. But I think a more pragmatic way of looking at it is, if I, you know, say there are 5,000 outlying facts about respiratory that you could potentially know. The danger is, you know, you get a question and you think, oh, I need to know that about, you know, airways, and I don't know it, so I'll go learn that one. In the process, you find another 500 facts you've got to know, so I'll learn them as well. And suddenly, you know, the time available for revising is gone. I haven't really covered the fundamentals of respiratory in the way that I should. And actually, what's the probability of me being asked a question on more than one of those areas? Probably less than 0.001%. So I'm spending a whole load of time on facts that I'm virtually guaranteed never to be asked, and no time on the hot topics, or, you know, the bread and butter stuff that's more likely to come up on the paper. You know, I think it's always better to be solid on the, you know, the 70% of the core material, and than it is to, you know, just try and, you know, cover at depth across the piece, because you'll just run out of time.
Mm-hmm. What are the different ways that somebody can revise?
A lot of it's down to personal preference. You know, first of all, there's the bookwork. You know, often there's no getting around that. It's a question of resources, really. So yes, I've got the books, I've got the question banks. You know, I could join a study group, maybe, if there's people in my specialty that are doing the same exam. I could maybe get a study buddy. Those things will help, particularly with your MCQs and your SBA type exams. When it comes to more the Viva or the OSCE type exams, you know, everyday work's more suited to those. So, you know, you can ask your consultant to ask you questions. You can get your colleagues to ask you questions as you're doing things. So that kind of helps you rehearse those types of exams. I think mocks are useful. You know, if you can do mocks, even courses are good as well. And sometimes the trusts or the deanery will put on specific mock type training. I encourage people to go along, because what you can do in a mock is I could say, Matt, I answer this question this way. What do you think? You know, was that a good answer? How would you answer it? I can have a dialogue with you as the mock examiner that I can't have with the real examiner. So you can, it's more informative, it's more tailored to you. So there's lots of different resources you can get. I find, you know, where you've got question banks available, if it's not a kind of a face-to-face type exam, they're really good for, you know, testing yourself, because testing is a key thing. You've got to, not only have you got to keep repeating going over the material, you've got to test yourself. It's the combination of the two that really helps you the most.
What kind of mindset do people need to have to learn and to maybe to recover from not doing very well in an OSCE, or to say you ask for feedback from a consultant and you get feedback that is well, cutting, shall we say? Yeah. So what kind of mindset do people need to actually learn from those experiences?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. Again, it all depends on the individual circumstances, what's happened. I mean, the first thing about feedback is always you have a choice. You know, do I accept this feedback or not? You know, you hear people will say a lot, you know, do I give that person's toxic thought free board and lodging in my head? And so it's worth working through those things, because the problem is, you know, they will make you anxious, and the anxiety will stop you doing your best in terms of revision. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we often have is, particularly where people have not passed the exam, is trying to help them not to take the previous attempts into the room. So I'd say to them, look, the examiners aren't sat there going, well, Peter, you failed Peter's taking this exam, he failed it last time, so we're going to write a stinker paper to trip him up again. You know, that's not going to happen, because actually they're just looking at it as here's a bunch of ST3s that are taking this exam. Here's the core knowledge that we expect them to have, and we'll examine that. So from that perspective, you know, focusing on that is more helpful than actually I failed this exam, and you know, I might do it again, because that just occupies headspace that you can use in a more effective way by thinking about how am I preparing for the next one. And again, you know, sometimes people do have effective revision strategies, they're just not using them in the right way. Often it's just a question of fine-tuning, and for things like comments from consultants or peers, you know, it's one of those things, you know, over time people will generally develop the armor to be able to cope with them, but again, you know, often you don't know what the intentionality is behind what somebody is saying. So I used an example from my own experience years ago. My boss, director of IT, you know, I said to him, look, Ian, I'm always whenever anything breaks, I'm the number one on your dial list. Pete, get on this and get it fixed as ASAP. So whenever there's a really nice, interesting project to do, I'm about number 157. So actually, I would quite like to do some of the interesting stuff. And he just dismissed me, said, well, don't call you because you're not creative, are you? And I festered on this for about 18 months. And how could he think that? How could he think that? And eventually, at one of my reviews, I said to him, Ian, remember you said that to me? And he just looked at me and goes, oh, God, you didn't take that seriously, did you? So I was just having a bad day. So I think that's something for people to dwell on. You know, sometimes it's like, you know, last time I met my consultant, I accidentally spilled tea down his shirt or whatever. You know, you just don't know what's going on in people's heads. So it's about, okay, they made a comment. You know, opinions are what they are. You know, if there's some truth in there, okay, embrace it. But you know, be prepared to accept as well that some of it might just be, I'm having a bad day. You know, I've not got very great interpersonal skills. You know, I'm known for being a bit of a curmudgeon. In which case, don't you know, try not to take those elements too seriously.
I can see that being quite challenging. Say that, you know, you failed an exam twice, and you're faced with having to revise it again. and this thoughts go through your mind, I'm a failure, I'm going to fail again, I don't know what I'm doing. I think it's quite difficult to get out of your head when those kind of thoughts exist.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where perspective comes in. So, I ask people, why did you go into medicine in the first place? What was it that you were hoping that medicine would do for you? So first of all, that reacquaints them with why, because let's face it, to go through medical training and become a consultant is quite a long journey, and some specialties it can be very long. So just kind of putting them back in touch with why they started the journey in the first place is helpful. But then you've got to look at it. Okay, so if you don't, because sometimes, people do get a bit turned off. Well, I wasted loads of time revising for the last exam and I didn't pass. Well, actually, you've got to find, it's not about finding more time. It's often about using the time that you have got more effectively. And if you can do that and keep at it, actually you're best served by getting through the exam. If you can pass the exam, then that okay. If ST6, emergency medicine, FR Chem, that's your last exam, get the flags out. Often it's okay, that's through that round of exams and there's more coming in the future, but that's fine. But then that's helping you. The perspective here is, you've got to get through this to get to the rest of your career. And so if you don't find the time, or you don't work with somebody that can help you to hopefully be a little bit more successful, then predictably you're going to be stuck here for quite some time. And the pressure mounts, obviously. Some exams you only get a limited number of attempts. So if you get 4 attempts and you failed it 3 times, you totally understand why, the anxiety barometer would be, off the charts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people do get really anxious before exams.
Yeah, and again, these are things that you can work on. One of the big things I always try and get people to visualize is, you're walking into the room, sitting down to take the exam. How do you need to be at that particular moment in time? So yes, you're gonna be a little bit anxious. That's a given, but it's not a bad thing. Because there's a cognitive element to an emotion, and there's a physical element. And the physical element for anxiety is, pumping oxygenated blood to your head. Well, why wouldn't you want oxygenated blood in your head for an exam? It's where it's overdone, where it's a maladaptive anxiety that it's not helpful. But if you can get people to focus on, right, how do I get in the room in the right way? I often say, well, it's not about, because it doesn't matter how much preparation you do, you'll come out of the exam saying, well, I wish I'd done another couple of months of revision. If you'd have done another couple of months of revision, you'll come out saying, I wish I'd done another couple of months of revision. So there's never enough time to do the revision that you'd like to do. So don't fight it. As long as you've done enough revision on the stuff that you need to know to pass the exam, that's a much better place to be psychologically going into the room. And if your exam's in 6 months' time, the place to start to get in the room in that way is here and now. Having that good plan, breaking it down, time boxing things, knowing how I'm going to get in the room in the right way. It's better to be solid on 70% of the curriculum than it is to kind of, well, I've kind of scattergunned it a little bit, and I've tried here and there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is well-being as well. Whilst people do need to find the time to revise, if you've got a young family, well, that gets solved for you. But at the same time, if you're not finding time for yourself, you won't perform. And it's one of those perversities. I don't tend to like hours of revision as a metric, because I could have done 8 hours of revision. Well, what was the effective hours in that too? So I've wasted 6 hours. So it's better to do, have a rest, go and do something I like, and then do 2 hours of revision, because actually the likelihood is that's probably an hour and a half's effective revision. So I'm no worse off. In fact, I might be better off if I'm looking after myself. And the other thing that end focus gives you is you're bringing it all into a point. So when I have those unhelpful thoughts, you know, along the way, you can ask yourself, how's this helping me to get in the room in the right way? It isn't. Well, okay, then you need to stop having those thoughts, because they're not helping you to get to where you need to be on the day. And we'll often go through, you know, some people have good routines. You know, do you have to travel? You know, you're going to spend the night before in a hotel. You know, you're going to be able to take any study leave beforehand. You know, what are you going to do in the morning to, you know, to kind of energize yourself before you go in the room? You know, if you've got a 2-part exam, what are you going to do at lunchtime just to kind of chill out from the morning, you know, have a bit of relaxation, and then, you know, psych yourself up for the afternoon. So lots of things that you can potentially do that would help actually in the exam itself. And again, you know, if somebody's experiencing a lot of anxiety, you know, the earlier that we can get involved with them, the more we can help them. Because again, you know, we can practice mindfulness. You know, some of the techniques are really simple, you know. So I'll give you a free one, the stop technique. You know, if you find that you've got lots of toxic thoughts in your head, just keep yelling stop at yourself in your head. If you do it long enough, eventually those thoughts will have gone. And I would challenge you to reintroduce them. It's really difficult once the thoughts have gone to go back to where you were. And okay, they'll come back in again eventually, but you know what, with a clear head, you can you know, focus more on what's helping you.
Yeah. You mentioned that you work a lot with people that have failed exams multiple times. So what are some of the reasons that people fail exams?
Quite a common one we find fairly late on is neurodiversity. It's not uncommon in doctors. Sheer intellect gets you a long way, but eventually, you know, that complexity of life I talked about, you know, you're working as a registrar, you've got a busy life, you know, just the cognitive overload means that intellect alone won't help you anymore. Sometimes people don't change strategies either. So, you know, at medical school, I just used to, you know, do what I did. Well, that's great. Medical school, all you have to do is, you know, turn up to lectures, hand in your coursework, you know, pass the exams and party. But when you're a 30-year-old with you know, a busy career, actually you haven't got the time for that anymore. So people don't naturally change the strategy. They try and carry on in the way they've always passed exams, but eventually you get to the point where the exams are so difficult that strategy won't work anymore.
Okay. And when somebody has come to you because they failed the exam multiple times, so how do you work with them?
We work with them. So, you know, for the first thing is you know, from my perspective is we don't offer cookie cutter approaches. You know, what is it specifically that the person is having challenges with? What would help them the most? And sometimes it's simple things. You know, I can remember somebody I was working with doing the radiology exams, and you know, the particular exam they failed a number of times, and their colleagues, I should say, had a number of helpful tips. You know, here's this book you should read, it's all in there, I read that and that was enough to pass the exam. So 5 different colleagues, 5 different books, bought them all. The books are sat there. It's like a constant reminder that I'm not, you know, I should read all 5, but I haven't got time. So my view is buy 1 book. Don't buy 5, buy 1. You know one really well, because you're much better off. The 5 is just a constant negative reminder that, you know, the revision I intended to do isn't happening. A lot of it's down to time management. Again, some of it is just being unrealistic. Actually, the thought that I could do a 12-hour long day and then go home and revise, well, that's maybe not what I should be doing. So again, some of this is just about being a little bit more organized in life. So okay, there are a couple of things you can do. Then you say to yourself, well, okay, I'm going to have the night off watching Netflix because I'm really tired. Okay, but do 10 exam bank questions first, because some of this is about having guilt-free time. Like, if you know that there's a difference between I did 10 exam bank questions and then vegged out in front of Netflix, and just I came home from work and vegged out in front of Netflix. One of them, you're actually doing something to help you towards the exam. The other thing you can do as well, I talked about protecting time. You know, if Thursday morning is when I'm going to be doing my book work, I'm not going to plan to get the car washed or cut the grass then, you know, actually, but it's a nice sunny evening this evening. I've got back from work. I'll cut the grass now, so it's done. So again, that's an example of trying to use, you know, low value, to map low value activities to low value time to protect the higher quality time for other things. And again, you know, revision isn't just book work. You know, I can watch YouTube videos, I can do exam bank questions, I can do, there are other things that I can access.
So you've given some absolutely amazing tips, but just to finish off, if you had to pick out maybe 2 or 3 top tips for somebody that's preparing to sit an exam, what would they be?
So I guess the 3 I've mentioned already, you know, have a plan and use the time effectively by setting small goals. Repetition, keep going over the material, and testing. So whether it's you testing yourself, your colleagues testing you, or you're taking exam bank questions, and just as a final giveaway there, you know, often start working with people and they go, well, you know, I'm getting 60% of my exam bank questions wrong and it's terrible. And I go, no, it's great. What do you mean it's great? Because at this far out, what it's telling you is where you need to focus your revision. Where you're getting things wrong, that's where you need to be working. So some of this is kind of perspective and how you frame it as well. So yeah, they're not altogether convinced when I say this is great, but I think that's gold dust.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for your help, Peter.